Throughout American history, prison riots have exposed the harsh realities and deep-rooted issues within the correctional system. Often sparked by inhumane living conditions, racial tensions, gang rivalries, and neglect from prison authorities, these uprisings have resulted in widespread violence, destruction, and loss of life. Among the most brutal prison riots in the United States are incidents such as the 1971 Attica uprising in New York, the 1980 New Mexico State Penitentiary riot in Santa Fe, and the 2018 Lee Correctional Institution riot in South Carolina. These events not only shocked the public, but also revealed systemic failures, including overcrowding, poor security, and inadequate medical care. Inmates pushed to their limits have used riots as a desperate form of protest to demand basic human rights and better treatment. This overview explores some of the most violent and historically significant prison riots in America, shedding light on the conditions that led to such devastating chaos. Number 9. The Attica Prison Riot in 1971. The Attica Prison Riot, which took place from September 9th to 13th, 1971, at the Attica Correctional Facility in upstate New York, stands as one of the most significant and tragic events in the history of the American prison system. Sparked by demands for better living conditions and political rights, the riot ended in a violent state assault that left 43 people dead, including 33 inmates and 10 correctional officers and civilian employees, making it the deadliest prison uprising in U.S. history. Tensions at Attica had been building for months. Inmates, many of whom were African American or Latino, faced overcrowding, unsanitary conditions, minimal medical care, and abusive treatment by predominantly white prison staff. In early September 1971, the tipping point came when a fight between inmates and guards led to a prison-wide lockdown. On September 9th, over 1,200 inmates took control of D-Yard, a large outdoor exercise area, and seized 42 hostages. The inmates quickly organized and presented a list of 28 demands to prison officials and Governor Nelson Rockefeller. These included basic human rights, improved food and medical care, fair visitation policies, access to education, and an end to physical abuse. Over the next 4 days, negotiations took place involving journalists, lawyers, and civil rights activists, including prominent figures like Bobby Seale and William Kunstler. Despite some progress in talks, Governor Rockefeller refused to visit the prison or agree to full amnesty for the inmates. On the morning of September 13th, state troopers and corrections officers launched a violent assault to retake the prison. Using helicopters, tear gas, rifles, and shotguns, they stormed the yard in a chaotic 15-minute operation. In the aftermath, it was revealed that all 10 hostage deaths were caused by law enforcement gunfire, not by the inmates, contradicting initial reports by state officials. The Attica riot shocked the nation and ignited widespread public outrage. It exposed the brutal conditions within American prisons and highlighted the deep racial and social tensions affecting incarcerated populations. Investigations and lawsuits followed, and the state eventually paid millions in settlements to inmates and victims' families. Attica remains a powerful symbol of the struggle for prisoners' rights and justice. It prompted calls for reform, transparency, and accountability in corrections, and its legacy continues to influence prison policy debates to this day. Number 8. The New Mexico State Penitentiary Riot in 1980. The New Mexico State Penitentiary Riot, which erupted on February 2, 1980, in Santa Fe, stands as the deadliest and most brutal prison riot in American history. Over a 2-day period, the riot left 33 inmates dead, many of them gruesomely tortured and mutilated, and over 200 others injured, including prison staff. The violence exposed shocking levels of neglect, overcrowding, and administrative failure within the state's correctional system. The riot began in the early morning hours when inmates in Dormitory E-2 overpowered 4 guards. Using smuggled tools and keys taken from staff, they quickly gained access to other areas of the prison. The uprising was not pre-planned by gangs, but once it began, chaos spread rapidly. Inmates opened cell blocks, looted offices, and took hostages. The most horrifying violence occurred when prisoners gained access to cell blocks housing protective custody inmates, many of whom were informants, sex offenders, or considered targets by the general population. For the next 36 hours, rioters exacted brutal revenge. Victims were beaten, stabbed, decapitated, and even burned alive. Medical facilities and records were destroyed, making it difficult to treat the wounded or identify the dead. Meanwhile, 12 corrections officers were held hostage. Some were beaten and threatened, but remarkably, all survived. Authorities, fearing further bloodshed, chose to negotiate rather than launch an immediate armed assault. On February 3rd, the inmates finally surrendered, allowing the National Guard and state police to regain control of the facility. The prison was left in ruins, with millions of dollars in damages and blood-stained walls bearing evidence of the horrors that had occurred. In the aftermath, a commission was established to investigate the causes of the riot. The findings revealed a system in crisis. The prison was overcrowded, understaffed, poorly maintained, and lacked meaningful rehabilitation programs. Tensions had been building for months due to inhumane living conditions, abuses by guards, and a lack of proper classification among inmates. The riot was seen not just as a breakdown in security, but as a symptom of deep institutional decay. The 1980 Santa Fe riot prompted sweeping reforms in New Mexico's prison system, including improved oversight, staff training, and facility modernization. It also served as a national wake-up call, demonstrating the catastrophic consequences of ignoring inmate grievances and systemic dysfunction within correctional institutions. Number 7. The Lucasville Riot in 1993. The Lucasville Riot, also known as the Southern Ohio Correctional Facility Riot, was one of the longest and deadliest prison uprisings in U.S. history. Beginning on Easter Sunday, April 11, 1993, the riot lasted for 11 days and resulted in the deaths of 10 people, including 1 corrections officer and 9 inmates. The riot exposed the deep divisions among prison gangs, the failures of prison administration, and the broader challenges facing the American correctional system. Located in Lucasville, Ohio, the Southern Ohio Correctional Facility was a maximum security prison housing a volatile mix of inmates, including members of powerful gangs such as the Aryan Brotherhood, the Gangster Disciples, and the Sunni Muslim group known as the Muslims. Tensions had been mounting for months over a variety of issues, including overcrowding, harsh conditions, and what inmates saw as forced tuberculosis testing that conflicted with their religious beliefs. The immediate trigger for the uprising was the prison's mandatory TB testing policy, which involved the use of a substance containing alcohol, a violation of Muslim religious beliefs. As frustrations peaked, inmates in Cell Block L launched a coordinated revolt. They took 8 guards hostage and quickly gained control of the block. Over the next 11 days, they fortified their positions, issued demands, and engaged in violent confrontations with rival inmates and prison authorities. Negotiations between the inmates and the state were tense and prolonged. The inmates released videotapes outlining their demands, which included improved living conditions, religious rights, and amnesty for the rebellion. During the standoff, the rioting inmates executed 5 other prisoners whom they accused of being informants. Officer Robert Vallandigham was also killed during the uprising to pressure the state into meeting their demands. The riot ended on April 21, 1993, after an agreement was reached in which prison officials promised not to retaliate against inmates involved in the uprising if they surrendered peacefully. However, the aftermath was far from peaceful. Several inmates were tried and sentenced to death or long prison terms, including key figures believed to be the ringleaders of the rebellion. The Lucasville riot highlighted the power of prison gangs, the need for effective communication between prison staff and inmates, and the dangers of ignoring inmates' religious and human rights. It remains a defining moment in Ohio's correctional history and continues to be a case study in prison crisis management and reform. Number 6. The Lee Correctional Institution riot in 2018. The Lee Correctional Institution riot, which occurred on April 15, 2018, in Bishopville, South Carolina, was one of the deadliest prison riots in the United States in recent decades. Over the course of several hours, violent clashes among inmates resulted in the deaths of 7 prisoners and injuries to at least 22 others. The riot exposed deep systemic failures within the South Carolina prison system and highlighted the growing influence of gangs in correctional facilities across the country. The incident unfolded in multiple housing units over a period of more than 7 hours. Inmates armed with knives, shanks, and makeshift weapons engaged in brutal combat, primarily driven by rival gang affiliations and disputes over control of contraband markets within the prison. According to reports from the South Carolina Department of Corrections, SCDC, the violence was initiated by conflicts over territory, drugs, and cell phones, valuable commodities that play a significant role in gang operations behind bars. Despite the chaos, prison staff did not intervene immediately. Fearing for their own safety and lacking adequate manpower or equipment, correctional officers waited until emergency response teams could arrive. This delay allowed the violence to continue unchecked for hours, with inmates left to fend for themselves as the facility became a battlefield. The 7 men who died were not killed by guards, but by fellow prisoners, stabbed, beaten, and left to die in what officials described as scenes of gruesome and inhumane violence. The Lee riot raised urgent questions about prison staffing, security protocols, and the flow of illegal items into facilities. At the time, South Carolina prisons were operating with dangerously low staff numbers, a factor that experts identified as a major contributor to the tragedy. Additionally, the widespread presence of contraband cell phones allowed inmates to coordinate attacks and maintain gang control, even from behind bars. Following the riot, state and federal lawmakers called for sweeping reforms. South Carolina officials requested assistance from the Federal Communications Commission, FCC, to block cell phone signals inside prisons, and investments were made to improve staffing, training, and surveillance systems. However, critics argued that deeper issues, such as overcrowding, underfunding, and lack of rehabilitative programming, remained unaddressed. The 2018 Lee Correctional Institution riot stands as a stark reminder of how violence can erupt when neglected prison systems collide with organized gang power. It underscored the urgent need for reform to ensure the safety of inmates, staff, and the broader community. Number 5. The Cook County Jail Riot in 1971. The Cook County Jail Riot of 1971 marked a critical moment in the history of American corrections, exposing deep-rooted problems within one of the largest pretrial detention facilities in the United States. Located in Chicago, Illinois, Cook County Jail was notorious for its overcrowded conditions, poor sanitation, and harsh treatment of inmates. The riot, which occurred on August 21, 1971, was a direct response to these inhumane conditions and part of a broader wave of prisoner uprisings across the country during that era. The riot began when a group of inmates in Division I, the jail's oldest and most overcrowded unit, refused to return to their cells. Tensions had been building for weeks over inadequate food, lack of medical care, limited access to legal resources, and verbal and physical abuse by correctional officers. Inspired in part by the national prisoner rights movement and recent events such as the Attica uprising in New York, the inmates at Cook County demanded immediate reforms. Soon, the protest turned violent. Inmates began setting fires, smashing windows, and fashioning makeshift weapons out of metal bed frames and broken furniture. Guards attempting to regain control were met with fierce resistance. Over the course of the riot, several correctional officers and inmates were injured, though no fatalities were reported. The standoff lasted for several hours, before reinforcements from the Sheriff's Department and local police arrived to secure the facility. In the aftermath, dozens of inmates were transferred to other jails and several were placed in solitary confinement. While jail officials initially portrayed the uprising as a criminal disturbance, civil rights advocates and local media called attention to the inmates' grievances. Investigations revealed that some of their claims, particularly regarding overcrowding and abuse, were valid. At the time, Cook County Jail was housing more than double its intended capacity, with many inmates awaiting trial for months or even years due to court backlogs. The 1971 riot forced local officials to confront long-standing issues within the Cook County correctional system. Although systemic reform was slow, the event contributed to broader discussions about pretrial detention, inmate rights, and conditions of confinement in urban jails. It also underscored the power of collective inmate action during a decade when prisoners across the country were demanding to be treated with dignity and justice. Number 4. The Yuma Prison Riot in 2004. The Yuma Prison Riot of 2004 stands as a significant example of racially and gang-motivated violence within the Arizona Department of Corrections. On December 13, 2004, a large-scale riot erupted at the Arizona State Prison Complex Yuma, located near the state's southwestern border. The disturbance involved more than 200 inmates and resulted in dozens of injuries to both prisoners and correctional staff. The riot shed light on growing tensions among prison gangs and raised serious concerns about facility security and inmate management. The violence broke out in the prison's Cheyenne unit, a medium security yard that housed a racially diverse inmate population. According to official reports, the riot began when Hispanic inmates, believed to be associated with the Sureños, a powerful California-based prison gang, launched a coordinated attack on black inmates. The assault was reportedly triggered by growing hostilities between the two groups, including disputes over territory, drug trafficking within the prison, and racial provocations. Within minutes, the prison yard descended into chaos. Inmates used makeshift weapons, including shanks, broom handles, and metal rods to attack their targets. Prison staff were quickly overwhelmed by the scale and speed of the violence. Reinforcements were called in, and guards used tear gas, rubber bullets, and pepper spray to regain control. The riot lasted for more than 30 minutes before order was restored. By the end of the incident, at least 40 inmates had suffered serious injuries, including stab wounds and blunt force trauma. Several correctional officers were also hurt while attempting to intervene. The prison was immediately placed on lockdown, and emergency protocols were activated across the Arizona prison system to prevent further outbreaks of violence. The Yuma riot prompted a thorough investigation into gang activity within Arizona prisons. Authorities discovered that the attack had been planned in advance and that gang leaders had coordinated their members through coded messages and contraband communication devices. The incident led to tighter restrictions on inmate movement, increased surveillance, and the reclassification of high-risk gang-affiliated inmates to higher security levels. The 2004 Yuma prison riot highlighted the dangers of housing rival gang members in close proximity and underscored the importance of proactive intelligence gathering in prison environments. It also contributed to a broader dialogue about prison overcrowding, racial segregation policies, and the need for improved staff training in managing gang-influenced populations. Number 3. The Folsom Prison Riot in 1927. The Folsom Prison Riot of 1927 is one of the earliest and most violent uprisings in California prison history. On November 24, 1927, during a failed escape attempt, chaos erupted inside Folsom State Prison, a maximum security facility located near Sacramento. At the time, Folsom was considered one of the toughest prisons in the country, known for its harsh conditions and a population filled with some of the most hardened criminals in the state. The riot was led by a group of inmates attempting to break free from the prison by taking advantage of a work detail in the prison's quarry area. Armed with smuggled and improvised weapons, including pistols somehow brought into the prison, the inmates launched a surprise attack against the guards. The attempted breakout turned into a full-scale riot as the prisoners took hostages and opened fire. 2 correctional officers, including Captain Robert Klein, were killed in the initial outbreak of violence. Several inmates also lost their lives during the fighting, which quickly spread throughout the prison yard. The California Highway Patrol and local sheriff's deputies were called in to support the overwhelmed prison staff. After several hours of intense gunfire and negotiations, the riot was brought under control. In total, at least 11 people were killed, including 2 guards and 9 inmates. Several others were wounded. The 1927 Folsom prison riot shocked the public and drew widespread media coverage. It highlighted the serious security flaws within the prison system, including lax oversight, poor intelligence on inmate activities, and the dangerous conditions that could brew unrest. Many questioned how firearms had been introduced into such a tightly controlled facility, and an investigation was launched into corruption and lapses in security protocols. In the aftermath of the riot, prison policies in California were reevaluated. Security at Folsom and other state prisons was tightened, and reforms were introduced to better monitor inmate movements and communication. The incident also helped shape the future of correctional officer training and use of force policies in the state. The Folsom Prison Riot of 1927 remains a grim chapter in the history of American incarceration. It served as an early warning of the volatility that can arise within high-security institutions when order breaks down, and it reinforced the need for robust prison management and reform. Number 2. The U.S. Penitentiary Atlanta Riot in 1987. The 1987 riot at the U.S. Penitentiary in Atlanta, Georgia, stands as one of the most significant and chaotic prison uprisings in American history. Sparked by immigration policy and fear of deportation, the riot was carried out primarily by Cuban detainees who had been held in U.S. federal custody since the 1980 Mariel boat lift. These detainees were among the approximately 125,000 Cubans who had entered the United States during that mass exodus, many of whom had criminal records or had been released from mental institutions by the Castro regime. On November 23, 1987, tensions erupted after the U.S. government announced it had reached an agreement with Cuba to repatriate up to 2,500 of the Mariel Cubans, many of whom had been detained for years without formal criminal charges or trials. The announcement triggered widespread panic among the detainees, who feared brutal treatment or execution upon return to Cuba. Their desperation exploded into violence. Over the next 11 days, the detainees took control of major sections of the prison. More than 100 prison staff members and civilians were taken hostage. The inmates set fire to several buildings, destroyed prison infrastructure, and created barricades to hold off federal authorities. Armed with makeshift weapons and using hostages as human shields, the detainees resisted efforts by law enforcement to retake the facility. The riot resulted in at least one confirmed death, an inmate killed under unclear circumstances, and numerous injuries to staff, inmates, and responders. The violence caused an estimated $35 million in damages to the penitentiary. The standoff finally ended on December 4, 1987, after intensive negotiations involving the FBI, Bureau of Prisons officials, and religious intermediaries. The detainees eventually released the hostages and surrendered peacefully. The U.S. Penitentiary Atlanta riot exposed deep flaws in both the federal prison system and immigration policy. Many of the detainees had fallen into a legal limbo, unable to gain U.S. citizenship, yet unable to be deported until the agreement with Cuba. The incident sparked national debate on indefinite detention, immigrant rights, and due process. Following the riot, federal authorities reevaluated detention protocols for non-citizens and took steps to improve security measures in high-risk facilities. The 1987 Atlanta prison riot remains a chilling reminder of what can happen when political policy, human rights, and prison management collide. Number 1. The Pelican Bay State Prison Riot in the 2000s. On February 23, 2000, Pelican Bay State Prison, California's notorious Supermax facility located near the Oregon border, was the site of one of the most violent prison riots in recent U.S. history. Known for housing California's most dangerous inmates, Pelican Bay had long been a focal point for inter-gang tensions and systemic violence. The 2000 riot, marked by racial division and gang warfare, exposed the explosive nature of prison politics within maximum security institutions. The riot erupted on the prison's maximum security yard when a large-scale fight broke out between African American and Hispanic inmates. The conflict had been brewing for months, largely due to heightened tensions between rival prison gangs, specifically the Black Guerrilla family and the Southern Hispanic gang affiliates, Sureños. These groups had clashed over control of prison economies, territories, and racial dominance. The violence quickly escalated beyond hand-to-hand combat. Many inmates had fashioned crude weapons from metal and other materials smuggled or stolen from the facility. As chaos unfolded, prison guards responded by firing non-lethal rounds to subdue the inmates. When that failed, they resorted to using live ammunition. Over 30 warning shots were fired, and dozens of inmates were injured. One inmate was killed during the incident, and several others suffered life-threatening stab wounds. The yard was left stained with blood, while the institution went into an extended lockdown. The riot highlighted the failures of the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation, CDCR, in managing gang dynamics inside high-security prisons. Despite Pelican Bay's design as a secure facility, it was clear that prison gangs maintained a structured hierarchy and communication network both inside and outside prison walls. The riot forced CDCR to reevaluate its policies on segregation, inmate interaction, and intelligence gathering. Public outcry followed the riot, particularly after reports surfaced that prison officials may have had prior knowledge of the brewing conflict but failed to act. Investigations suggested that racial and gang divisions were being exploited rather than mitigated, with some critics arguing that the prison's environment fostered the very violence it sought to contain. The 2000 Pelican Bay riot remains a defining moment in California's prison history, a stark reminder of the volatility within maximum security institutions and the enduring power of prison gangs. It continues to be cited in debates over solitary confinement, gang intervention strategies, and prison reform nationwide.